They say justice is blind, but in the West of 1880, justice could see just fine. It saw your skin color, your family name, and how useful you were to those in power. What happens when a man stands against an entire town, determined to hang an innocent woman? This ain't justice, this is vengeance against her father, and I won't stand for it. What if saving one life meant sacrificing everything you've built? Would you still do what's right when the cost is everything you own? Stay with me until the final chapter to witness a story so scandalous, so challenging to the moral hypocrisy of the frontier that they tried to bury it beneath the dust of Wyoming's plains. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in the Wild West wasn't outlaws or bullets, it was the truth. Before we dive deeper into this powerful story, I need you to do something important right now. Hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. Why? Because here at The Black Rancher, we're uncovering the hidden stories of black heroes who shaped the American frontier. Stories deliberately erased from history books. If you believe everyone deserves to see themselves in America's story, share this video now. These forgotten tales of courage, justice, and sacrifice need to be told. Subscribe now and join our community of truth seekers who refuse to let history remain whitewashed. Now welcome to The Black Rancher as we journey back to Wyoming Territory, 1880, where our story begins. Clearwater, Wyoming Territory, summer, 1880. The morning sun cast long shadows across Isaiah Washington's land as he surveyed the eastern boundary of the Crescent Moon Ranch. At 42, his body bore the scars of a life harder than most. 20 years as a slave in Georgia, followed by service with the Buffalo Soldiers, and now 12 years carving a respectable ranch from Wyoming's unforgiving terrain. Isaiah adjusted his worn Stetson, squinting at the distant mountains. His 320 acres represented everything he'd fought for: independence, respect, a legacy he could someday pass down. The drought had been brutal this year, but his cattle had fared better than most, thanks to the natural spring feeding the eastern pastures. "Mr. Washington?" Isaiah turned to see young Thomas Miller galloping toward him, the banker's 16-year-old son looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "Whoa there, Thomas. What's got you riding like the devil's on your heels?" Isaiah's deep voice carried across the distance between them. The boy pulled his horse to a stop, breathing hard. "They're going to hang her, Mr. Washington, today at noon." Isaiah's expression darkened. "Hang who?" "Eliza Reed. Judge Harmon convicted her this morning, said she was an accomplice to her father's crimes. Trial lasted all of 20 minutes. A muscle tightened in Isaiah's jaw. "What evidence did they present?" "None that I heard. Just that she's Samuel Reed's daughter." Thomas lowered his voice. "Everyone knows the judge lost his brother in that stagecoach robbery last year. He's been waiting for any Reed to fall into his jurisdiction." Isaiah glanced at the position of the sun. Just past 10 o'clock. Less than 2 hours. "Samuel Reed is a murderer and a thief," Isaiah said carefully. "But his daughter—" "She came to town looking for honest work," Thomas interrupted. "Been working at the Henderson boarding house for 3 weeks now. Doesn't even use the Reed name. Goes by her mother's maiden name, Ellis." Isaiah closed his eyes briefly. Eliza Reed. He remembered a small girl with serious eyes and braided hair, sitting outside his blacksmith shop 15 years ago in Denver. Samuel Reed had been a different man then, before the war changed him, before grief and whiskey turned him cruel. "Mr. Washington," Thomas hesitated, "you're respected in town. If you spoke up—" "Respected?" Isaiah's laugh held no humor. "I'm tolerated because I pay my taxes and keep to myself. Because my cattle fetch good prices and my coin spends the same as any white man's." Thomas looked down. They both knew the fragile nature of Isaiah's position in Clearwater. Isaiah whistled for his horse. "Go on home, Thomas." "You're not going to help?" The black rancher's eyes held a storm. "I didn't say that." As Thomas rode away, Isaiah's mind traveled back to Denver, 1865. To a night when a white man named Samuel Reed had stepped between Isaiah and 3 drunk ex-Confederates, likely saving his life, a debt unpaid all these years. "Looks like it's time to settle accounts," Isaiah murmured. mounting his horse and turning toward town. Main Street was packed by the time Isaiah rode into Clearwater. He left his horse at the livery stable, nodding curtly to Jim Parker, who eyed him with curiosity. "Didn't expect to see you in town today, Washington," Parker said, taking the reins. "Business couldn't wait," Isaiah replied, his tone discouraging further conversation. He moved through the crowd gathering near the wooden gallows erected in the town square. Mothers hushed children who asked too many questions. Men spoke in low, excited tones. A hanging was entertainment in a town where diversions were scarce. From the corner of his eye, Isaiah saw Sheriff Cooper standing at the base of the gallows, looking uncomfortable. The sheriff was a fair man, generally, but the judge outranked him in every way that mattered. "Isaiah." Mayor Whitlock approached, surprise evident in his voice. "Rare to see you at these civic functions." Isaiah met the mayor's gaze steadily. "Is it justice we're witnessing today, or vengeance?" Whitlock's smile faltered. "Now, Isaiah, you know we can't have outlaws thinking their kin can hide in our town. Sets a dangerous precedent." "What crime did she commit?" "She's Samuel Reed's daughter. Blood tells, they say." Isaiah's voice dropped lower. "That's not a crime under any law I know." The mayor shifted uncomfortably. "Judge Harmon has evidence she's been passing information to her father's gang. Town council backs his decision." He paused, studying Isaiah's face. "You do well to remember how long it took folks around here to accept a black man owning prime ranch land. Some still haven't." The threat hung in the air between them. Isaiah scanned the crowd, finally spotting Eliza Reed standing on the gallows platform, hands bound before her. She wasn't the little girl he remembered, but a young woman of 23, her face composed despite the circumstances. She held herself with dignity, refusing to cower before the crowd that had condemned her. Judge Harmon approached the platform, Bible in hand, his black coat pristine in the dusty square. "Citizens of Clearwater," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "We gather today to witness justice being served upon Eliza Reed, daughter of the outlaw Samuel Reed, for the crimes of conspiracy and aiding known criminals." As the judge continued his speech, Isaiah moved closer to Sheriff Cooper. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "you know this isn't right." Cooper kept his eyes forward. "Not my place to question the judge." "Since when does Clearwater hang people without evidence, without witnesses?" Isaiah pressed. "Would you hang her if she weren't Reed's daughter?" "Keep your voice down, Washington," Cooper warned. "I've got a family to feed." "So you'll let an innocent woman hang to protect your position?" Cooper finally turned to him, anger flashing in his eyes. "What would you have me do? The decision's been made." Isaiah looked up at Eliza, who now stood with the noose being placed around her neck. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and in that moment, Isaiah saw not fear, but resignation, the look of someone who had always expected the world's cruelty to find them eventually. It was the same look he'd seen in the mirror many times during his years in chains. "I aim to settle a debt," Isaiah said, "one that's 15 years overdue." Before Cooper could respond, Isaiah pushed through the crowd toward the gallows. "Stop!" His voice thundered across the square, silencing the murmurs. All eyes turned to him. "This hanging cannot proceed." Judge Harmon's face darkened with fury. "Mr. Washington, you are interrupting a legal proceeding." Isaiah climbed the steps of the gallows, ignoring the bailiff who moved to block him. "There's nothing legal about hanging an innocent woman for her father's crimes. She has been tried and convicted. In 20 minutes with no defense and no evidence," Isaiah cut in, standing now between Eliza and the judge. "I demand she be given a fair trial." The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Judge Harmon's face flushed red. "You have no standing to demand anything in my court, Mr. Washington. Your background should remind you of your place." A hush fell over the crowd at the judge's implication. Isaiah felt Eliza's eyes on him, felt the weight of every stare. "My background," Isaiah said, his voice carrying across the silent square, "taught me to recognize injustice when I see it. And this," he gestured to the noose, "is an injustice I cannot abide." "Remove this man," Judge Harmon ordered the bailiff. "Wait." Isaiah raised his hand. Wyoming territorial law allows for a prisoner's debt to be paid by another. I'll stand surety for Miss Reed." Judge Harmon scoffed. "That law applies to fines, not capital punishment." "Actually," came a new voice from the crowd, "Mr. Washington is correct." Heads turned to see Thomas Miller's father, Alexander Miller, the town banker, stepping forward with a law book in hand. Territorial Statute 18.7 allows for substitution of punishment in cases where evidence is circumstantial and no direct harm has come to citizens of the territory. The judge's face contorted with rage. "Mr. Miller, you overstep." "I'm merely citing the law, Your Honor," Miller replied calmly. "As the territory's appointed banker, it's my duty to ensure all proceedings are properly conducted." A tense silence followed. Judge Harmon knew challenging Miller could bring scrutiny from territorial authorities, scrutiny his hasty trial wouldn't withstand. "What do you propose, Washington?" the judge finally asked, his voice tight with suppressed fury. Isaiah met his gaze unflinchingly. "I'll post bond for her release into my custody. $1,000. Gasps rippled through the crowd. It was a fortune, nearly half the value of a good ranch. "And if she flees? If she joins her father's gang?" Judge Harmon challenged. "Then you can take my ranch," Isaiah said simply. "Everything I own." The crowd erupted in conversation. Eliza stared at Isaiah, confusion and disbelief written across her face. Nobody in the history of Clearwater had ever risked so much for a stranger, especially not a black man for a white woman accused of crimes. Judge Harmon saw the mood of the crowd shifting. He recognized a potential political problem brewing. With obvious reluctance, he nodded to the sheriff. "Remove her restraints. She's in Mr. Washington's custody until a proper hearing can be arranged." His eyes narrowed as he added, "1 month from today." As the noose was removed from Eliza's neck, Judge Harmon stepped close to Isaiah. "You've made a powerful enemy today," he whispered. 1 month won't change the outcome, just the price you'll pay along with her." Isaiah said nothing as he guided the stunned Eliza down the gallows steps, aware of the hundreds of eyes following their every move. Some gazes held admiration, others confusion, but most reflected something far more dangerous, the simmering anger of people who believed the natural order had been disrupted. As they walked away from the gallows, Eliza finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." Isaiah kept his eyes forward as they moved through the parting crowd. "I knew your father once. He did me a favor a long time ago." "My father hasn't done anyone a favor in years," she said bitterly. "People change," Isaiah acknowledged, "but debts remain." What neither of them knew, as they left the town square with whispers following in their wake, was that Isaiah Washington had just set in motion events that would test every loyalty, challenge every alliance, and ultimately force the entire town of Clearwater to confront its deepest hypocrisies. And somewhere in the mountains, Samuel Reed was about to learn that his daughter's life hung in the balance of a 15-year-old debt. If you're still with me, you're witnessing one of the most extraordinary acts of courage in the untold history of the West. But this is just the beginning of Isaiah's battle against an entire town determined to punish him for challenging their hypocrisy. This is The Black Rancher, bringing you the stories history tried to erase. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and notification bell now. Share this video with someone who appreciates powerful stories of justice and sacrifice. The most shocking revelations are still to come. Let's continue with Chapter 3. 3 days after the halted hanging, the consequences of Isaiah's actions began to materialize. He rode into town to purchase supplies, only to find Thornton's general store unwilling to serve him. "Sorry, Washington. Credit accounts are being reviewed. Cash only for you from now on," Thornton said, not meeting his eyes. Isaiah placed 3 gold eagles on the counter. "I've never asked for credit." Thornton pushed the coins back. "We're running low on supplies, serving our regular customers first." Outside the store, Isaiah found Thomas Miller waiting for him. "It's happening all over town," Thomas said quietly, falling into step beside him. "The blacksmith claimed his forge was too backed up to shoe your horses. Reynolds won't buy your cattle this season. They're trying to break you without being obvious about it." Isaiah nodded, unsurprised. And your father? Thomas looked uncomfortable. He's under pressure too. The judge has friends at the Territorial Bank. But Pa says your accounts are secure. He'll make sure of it. They passed the Clearwater Herald office, where the latest edition was displayed in the window. The headline read, "Rancher disrupts justice, outlaw's daughter escapes punishment." "They're painting you as a criminal sympathizer," Thomas said. "Why'd you do it, Mr. Washington? You must have known what would happen." Isaiah was silent for a moment. "There are debts that go beyond money, Thomas, the kind that define what kind of man you are." At the livery stable, Isaiah found his horse waiting, but Jim Parker appeared nervous. "Board's going up to $5 a day for your horse," Parker announced, not meeting Isaiah's eyes. "It's 50 cents for everyone else," Isaiah observed. Parker shrugged uncomfortably. Times are changing. As Isaiah mounted, he saw Sheriff Cooper approaching. "Washington," Cooper called. "A word." The sheriff looked around to ensure no one was within earshot. "I respect what you did," he said quietly. "But you need to know. Judge Harmon has sent telegrams to every law officer in 3 territories asking for information on Samuel Reed's whereabouts. He's determined to bring him in before the hearing." "Why tell me this?" Cooper's expression was grim. "Because if Reed is captured, the judge won't need to wait for the hearing. He'll hang both Reed and his daughter immediately, and there will be nothing anyone can do to stop it." Isaiah absorbed this information silently. "How is she adjusting?" Cooper asked. "She keeps to herself. Does her share of the work," Isaiah replied. He'd given Eliza the small cabin where his ranch hand Miguel used to live before returning to Mexico. "There's talk," Cooper said carefully. "Inappropriate talk about a white woman living on a black man's property." "People always talk," Isaiah replied. "Doesn't make their words worth listening to." As Isaiah turned to leave, Cooper added, "Judge Harmon is hosting a town meeting tonight. I'd make sure your property is secure." Isaiah rode back to the crescent moon under darkening skies. The drought had finally broken that morning, and storm clouds gathered on the horizon. A fitting backdrop for the storm he could feel brewing around him. At the ranch, he found Eliza mending a fence in the north pasture. She'd proven herself a hard worker, asking for no special treatment. "Storm's coming," he called as he approached. "Best finish that tomorrow." She hammered one last nail before gathering her tools. "People in town treated you differently today, didn't they?" When Isaiah didn't answer, she continued, "This is how it begins. First they shun you, then they squeeze you financially, and finally..." She trailed off. "Finally?" Isaiah prompted. Her eyes met his, haunted by experience. "Violence always comes last. My father learned that lesson too late." They walked back to the main house in silence, the wind picking up around them. "Mr. Washington," she said finally, "you should return me to the sheriff's custody. Your life here, everything you've built, it's not worth destroying for a stranger." "Is that what your father would say?" Isaiah asked. Anger flashed across her face. "My father abandoned us when I was 14. Left my mother to die of consumption while he robbed stagecoaches. Whatever man you think you owe a debt to no longer exists." Before Isaiah could respond, they spotted riders approaching. At least 20 men on horseback, torches illuminating their path in the gathering darkness. "Get inside," Isaiah told her, his hand moving to the rifle strapped to his saddle. "They'll kill you," Eliza said. "They'll try," Isaiah replied calmly. "Kitchen cabinet has a false back. Hide there if things go wrong." As the riders drew closer, Isaiah recognized Judge Harmon at their head, alongside Mayor Whitlock and several prominent townsmen. The judge raised his hand, and the group halted 30 yards from the house. "Mr. Washington," the judge called out, "we've come to discuss the matter of the Reed woman." "My property isn't a courthouse, Judge Harmon," Isaiah replied, standing his ground on his own porch, "and I don't recall scheduling any discussions for tonight." Several men laughed, the sound ugly in the night air. "The citizens of Clearwater have concerns," Mayor Whitlock interjected. "Concerns about harboring the daughter of a known criminal, a man who has robbed and murdered good people from this very community. If you have evidence Eliza Reed has committed any crime, present it at the hearing," Isaiah said. "Until then, she remains in my custody by legal arrangement." Judge Harmon's face tightened with barely controlled rage. The arrangement can be reconsidered if the custodian is found unsuitable. Is that a threat, Judge? Isaiah's voice remained steady. It's a reminder, Harmon replied. Clearwater has standards. A colored man living alone with a white woman, even a criminal's daughter, violates those standards. Thunder rumbled in the distance as rain began to fall, hissing against the torches. I've broken no law, Isaiah stated firmly. And I'll remind you, gentlemen, that you're trespassing on private property I paid for with honest labor. One of the men spat on the ground, property that should have gone to a real American. Judge Harmon silenced the man with a gesture, then turned back to Isaiah. We're reasonable men, Washington. Return the Reed woman to proper authorities, and things can go back to normal. Your position in our community can be restored. And if I refuse? The judge's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then I fear we cannot guarantee your safety, or the safety of your property. Times are dangerous. Accidents happen. The implication hung in the rain-soaked air between them. Isaiah's gaze moved slowly across the faces of the men he'd lived alongside for 12 years, men who'd traded with him, nodded to him on the street, accepted his money, all while waiting for an excuse to remind him of his place. I purchased this land legally, Isaiah said, his voice carrying across the yard. I built this ranch with my own hands after serving this country as a buffalo soldier. I've broken no laws and honored all contracts. If that's not enough to be treated with basic dignity, then perhaps Clearwater should reconsider what it stands for. The rain was falling harder now, extinguishing several torches. Judge Harmon's face twisted with contempt. You've made your choice, he said coldly. Remember it when you lose everything. He turned his horse, addressing the group. We'll reconvene tomorrow to discuss appropriate measures. As the riders departed, Isaiah remained on the porch, watching until their torches disappeared into the stormy night. When he entered the house, he found Eliza waiting, a shotgun in her hands. You should have given me up, she said quietly. Isaiah took off his wet coat. That's not who I am. Who are you then? No man risks everything for a stranger. Isaiah was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, Denver, 1865, I was working as a blacksmith. 3 ex-Confederate soldiers decided a uppity Negro with his own shop was an offense they couldn't tolerate. They cornered me behind the livery one night. Understanding dawned on Eliza's face. My father, Isaiah nodded. Samuel Reed stepped in, put himself between me and 3 armed men, said if they wanted to get to me, they'd have to go through him first. He paused. They backed down. Your father saved my life that night. Why would he do that? She asked, bewildered. He never mentioned we weren't friends, Isaiah explained. But he was one of the few white men who treated me like a human being. Said he'd fought in the war and seen enough good men die over stupid prejudices. Eliza set the shotgun down, processing this revelation. The father you knew died years ago, she said finally. After my mother passed, something broke in him. The drinking got worse, then came the robberies, then the killings. People change, Isaiah acknowledged, but a debt is still a debt. They sat in silence as rain pounded the roof. They'll come back, she said finally, with more men. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Isaiah's expression remained resolute. I've spent my life being told where I can go, what I can own, who I can speak to. I won't go back to living in fear. Then we need a plan, Eliza said, unexpected steel in her voice. Because Judge Harmon won't stop until he gets what he wants, and neither will my father if he learns where I am. Isaiah looked at her with new appreciation. You have something in mind? For the first time since he'd known her, Eliza smiled, a small, determined expression that transformed her face. I'm Samuel Reed's daughter, she said simply. I know a thing or two about outmaneuvering men who underestimate me. Outside, the storm raged on, a prelude to the tempest that was about to engulf Clearwater, Wyoming. A tempest centered around a black rancher who dared to stand against an entire town's hypocrisy, and the outlaw's daughter who held more secrets than anyone suspected. A week after the midnight confrontation, Isaiah's position had grown increasingly precarious. The bank remained his only ally in town, and even Alexander Miller was being pressured to call in Isaiah's loans. Supplies were running dangerously low at the ranch, forcing Isaiah to ride to the neighboring town of Riverton, a full day's journey, for basic necessities. Meanwhile, Judge Harmon had escalated his campaign. The Clearwater Herald now openly questioned whether a former slave could be trusted with property ownership at all. Rumors spread that Isaiah was harboring not just Eliza Reed, but other criminals as well. Sheriff Cooper, caught between duty and conscience, had begun avoiding Isaiah entirely. It was during Isaiah's absence on one such supply run that Thomas Miller rode frantically to the Crescent Moon Ranch, finding Eliza alone, repairing a damaged water pump. "They're coming," Thomas gasped, barely waiting for his horse to stop. "All of them. The judge, the sheriff, half the men in town. They claim they have evidence you've been signaling to outlaws from the ranch." Eliza's face paled. "What evidence?" "None," Thomas admitted. "But Judge Harmon received a telegram this morning. They've captured Samuel Reed in Colorado. He's being transported here as we speak." The wrench Eliza was holding clattered to the ground. "My father? Here?" Her voice shook slightly. "When?" "2 days, maybe 3. Thomas looked around nervously. "Where's Mr. Washington?" "Riverton. Won't be back until sundown." Eliza's mind raced. "Thomas, ride after him. Warn him not to return to the ranch. They'll arrest him the moment he sets foot on the property." Thomas hesitated. "What about you?" Eliza's expression hardened. "I need to be here when they come." "That's suicide." "No," she said firmly. "It's the only way this ends without bloodshed. Go, Thomas, find Isaiah." After Thomas reluctantly departed, Eliza moved quickly. She gathered what she needed from the main house, then headed to the small cabin where she'd been staying. From beneath a loose floorboard, she retrieved a small tin box containing letters, a faded photograph, and a small Derringer pistol. When the posse arrived an hour later, she was sitting calmly on the porch of the main house, hands folded in her lap. Judge Harmon looked almost disappointed to find her waiting peacefully. Sheriff Cooper avoided her gaze as he dismounted. "Eliza Reed," the judge announced formally, "you are hereby arrested for conspiracy against the citizens of Clearwater and for aiding and abetting known criminals." "What evidence do you have, Judge Harmon?" she asked calmly. The judge smiled coldly. "Your father is currently in custody. Once he arrives, I'm certain he'll provide all the evidence we need." "And Isaiah Washington? What charges have you invented for him?" "Harboring a criminal. Obstruction of justice." The judge's smile widened. "Perhaps even conspiracy. A colored man doesn't interfere with justice unless he has something to gain." Eliza stood slowly. "I'll come quietly on one condition." "You're in no position to make conditions," the judge snapped. "I have information," she said simply, "about my father's stolen money. Over $20,000 from the Central Pacific Railroad robbery, never recovered." The judge's expression changed subtly. Several of the posse members exchanged glances. "What information?" Sheriff Cooper asked, speaking for the first time. "I know where it's hidden," Eliza said, "and I'll tell you, once my father arrives, and once you agree to drop all charges against Isaiah Washington." Judge Harmon studied her suspiciously. "Why would you betray your own father to help Washington?" "My father abandoned me," Eliza replied evenly. "Isaiah saved my life." The judge considered her offer, naked greed warring with suspicion in his eyes. "Take her to the jail," he ordered finally. "We'll discuss terms when Reed arrives." As they led her away, Eliza cast one last look at the Crescent Moon Ranch, the place where for a brief time she'd been treated with dignity rather than contempt. 2 days later, a heavily guarded wagon arrived in Clearwater, carrying the infamous Samuel Reed. Despite his shackles, the outlaw maintained an imposing presence, tall and broad-shouldered, with penetrating blue eyes and a silver-streaked beard. At 50, he moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding respect through fear. When they brought him into the jailhouse, his eyes immediately found Eliza in the far cell. "Well," he said, his voice a rough rumble, "the prodigal daughter." "Hello, Father," Eliza replied coolly. Judge Harmon personally supervised Reed's placement in a cell separated from Eliza's by an empty one between them. You'll both hang in 2 days' time, the judge informed them with undisguised satisfaction. Unless, Miss Reed, you wish to discuss our arrangement regarding the stolen money. Samuel Reed's eyebrows rose. What's this? Your daughter has offered information about your hidden fortune in exchange for leniency. Not for herself, curiously, but for the Negro rancher who interfered with her execution. Reed's weathered face revealed nothing. My daughter has always had an active imagination. The judge turned to Eliza. Well, where is the money? She stepped forward, gripping the bars of her cell. First, I want your written guarantee that Isaiah Washington will face no charges and retain full ownership of his property. You're not in a position to negotiate, the judge snapped. Neither are you, she countered. My father is captured. I'm in custody. Your vengeance is nearly complete, except for the one thing everyone in this town really wants. Her eyes held his. The money. After a tense silence, Judge Harmon nodded curtly. I'll have the documents drawn up, but if you're lying... I'm not, Eliza said firmly. The money is hidden at the Crescent Moon Ranch. Both Reed and the judge stared at her in shock. That's impossible, Reed growled. I've never set foot on any ranch near here. Not recently, Eliza agreed, but 15 years ago, you passed through this area, after you saved a blacksmith named Isaiah Washington from 3 ex-Confederates in Denver. Understanding dawned on Reed's face. The Negro with the scar on his cheek. He bought that land 12 years ago, Eliza continued. Land where you buried the money from your first robbery, long before you became the Samuel Reed, back when you were still Thomas Ellis, my mother's husband. Judge Harmon looked between father and daughter, confusion giving way to greedy excitement. Where exactly on the ranch? I'll show you, Eliza said. Once I have your written guarantee for Isaiah's freedom. Done, the judge agreed immediately. Sheriff, fetch Mr. Miller to witness the document. As Cooper left, Samuel Reed studied his daughter with newfound interest. You've grown calculating in my absence, he observed. Your mother would be disappointed. Eliza's eyes flashed. Don't speak of her. You lost that right when you left her to die alone. The arrival of Alexander Miller and the subsequent drafting of legal documents occupied the next hour. Once Eliza was satisfied with the paperwork, Judge Harmon organized a party to ride to the Crescent Moon Ranch immediately, despite the lateness of the hour. Washington should be there by now, the judge said. Sheriff, bring him in. I want him to witness this personally. To their surprise, the ranch appeared deserted when they arrived. Lanterns revealed no sign of Isaiah, though his horses remained in the stable. He's hiding, one of the deputies suggested. No matter, Judge Harmon said dismissively. Miss Reed, show us where the money is hidden. Under armed guard, Eliza led them to the north pasture, to a distinctive rock formation near an old oak tree. It's buried beneath these rocks, she said. You'll need shovels. As the men eagerly began moving the rocks and digging, Sheriff Cooper approached Eliza. This is a dangerous game you're playing, he said quietly. She met his gaze steadily. I'm not playing. The excavation continued for nearly an hour before one of the diggers called out excitedly, I found something. They gathered around as a metal box was pulled from the earth. Judge Harmon personally broke the rusted lock, opening the lid to reveal stacks of currency, old bills, yellowed with age but still legal tender. There must be thousands here, the judge breathed, greed naked on his face. $23,480, Eliza stated precisely. My father's first big score. The judge turned to Samuel Reed, who was watching the proceedings with an unreadable expression. Is she telling the truth, Reed? The outlaw's eyes never left his daughter's face. Apparently so. As the men celebrated their discovery, Sheriff Cooper suddenly stiffened, looking toward the ranch house. Someone's coming. Lantern light revealed 3 riders approaching. Isaiah Washington, Thomas Miller, and, to everyone's shock, a uniformed U.S. Marshal. What is the meaning of this? Judge Harmon demanded as they dismounted. The Marshal, a stern-faced man named Hawkins, produced official papers. I have orders to investigate irregularities in the judicial proceedings of Clearwater, specifically regarding the case of Eliza Reed and the custodial arrangement with Isaiah Washington. Judge Harmon's face drained of color. Under whose authority? Territorial Governor, Marshal Hawkins replied flatly. "We received concerning telegrams about potential judicial misconduct." He glanced at Alexander Miller, who stood a little straighter. "This is outrageous," the judge blustered. "We've just uncovered stolen money buried on Washington's property, clear evidence of his conspiracy with these criminals." The marshal examined the box of money, then turned to Eliza. "Miss Reed, would you care to explain?" "That money was stolen by my father 15 years ago," she stated clearly. "Before Mr. Washington ever owned this land, my father buried it here when it was still unclaimed territory, intending to return for it." She met the judge's furious gaze. "I learned of its location from letters my father sent my mother years ago, letters I found after her death." "She's lying to protect Washington," Judge Harmon insisted. "Am I?" Eliza challenged. "Then explain why the money is in a box with the date 1865 carved into it, 7 years before Mr. Washington purchased this land. Explain why the bills are all dated prior to 1866. The marshal examined the box closely, confirming Eliza's claims. "Furthermore," she continued, "my father can confirm he's never met Isaiah Washington before today, at least not since a brief encounter in Denver 15 years ago." All eyes turned to Samuel Reed. After a long moment, the outlaw nodded slowly. "The girl speaks the truth. I buried that money here when this was just open country. Never came back for it because the law was too close on my heels." His eyes met Isaiah's. "Never knew who bought the land. Certainly never conspired with him." Isaiah stepped forward. "Marshal Hawkins, I purchased this land legally in 1868. I had no knowledge of any money buried on my property." The marshal nodded. "The territorial governor has reviewed the documentation Mr. Miller provided. Your land ownership is not in question, Mr. Washington." He turned to Judge Harmon. "Your conduct, however, Judge Harmon, raises serious concerns." "This is absurd," the judge sputtered. "Reed is a known criminal." "And will face justice for his crimes," the marshal interrupted. "As will anyone who has abused their authority to pursue personal vendettas." His gaze swept over the assembled townspeople. "The territorial governor takes a dim view of lynch mobs and judicial misconduct." As the implications sank in, Sheriff Cooper quietly approached Isaiah. "You knew about this?" he asked under his breath. Isaiah shook his head. "Thomas found me in Riverton, said things had escalated. We rode straight to the telegraph office and contacted the territorial authorities." "And the money, did you know about that?" "Not until tonight," Isaiah admitted, glancing at Eliza, who stood calmly as Marshal Hawkins officially took her father back into custody. The ride back to town was tense and silent. Judge Harmon, now under investigation himself, rode with his shoulders hunched, occasionally shooting venomous glances at Isaiah. The recovered money was secured by Marshal Hawkins to be returned to its rightful owners if they could be identified or else remanded to the territorial treasury. Back at the jailhouse as Samuel Reed was being secured for transport to the territorial capital for trial, he requested a moment to speak with Isaiah privately. "You saved my daughter's life," Reed said without preamble when Isaiah approached his cell. "I repaid a debt," Isaiah replied simply. Reed studied him thoughtfully. "Denver seems a lifetime ago. Didn't think you'd remember." "Some debts stay with you," the outlaw nodded slowly. "Then perhaps you'll accept one more obligation." He lowered his voice. "They'll hang me this time, no way around it. Eliza will be alone in the world." Isaiah understood what wasn't being said. "The law has cleared her of wrongdoing. She's free to make her own way." "A woman alone faces dangers worse than the law," Reed said grimly. "Especially one with my name. I can't change that." "No," Reed agreed, "but you can give her a chance. A fresh start, away from here." Isaiah considered the man before him, a murderer, a thief, yet also a father concerned for his daughter's future. If she chooses to stay in Clearwater, she'll have my protection for as long as she needs it. Reed's weathered face showed relief. "That's all I ask." He extended his hand through the bars, a gesture of equality rarely offered by white men to black men in 1880. Isaiah accepted the handshake, completing a circle that had begun 15 years earlier in a Denver alley. The morning of Samuel Reed's departure dawned clear and cold. Marshal Hawkins had arranged for additional federal officers to escort the notorious outlaw to the territorial capital, where he would stand trial for multiple robberies and murders. Before they left, Reed was allowed a final meeting with his daughter under supervision. What passed between them remained private, but those who observed noted that both father and daughter appeared more at peace afterward. As the prison wagon pulled away, Eliza stood beside Isaiah on the boardwalk, watching until it disappeared from view. "He'll hang," she said quietly, echoing her father's certainty. "Most likely," Isaiah agreed, seeing no point in false comfort. They turned and walked down Main Street, conscious of the stares following them, some curious, some hostile, some uncertain. Judge Harmon had been suspended pending investigation, his authority temporarily transferred to a circuit judge from Cheyenne. The recovered money had created a sensation throughout the territory, with newspapers from as far as Denver sending correspondents to cover the story. "What will you do now?" Isaiah asked as they reached the edge of town. Eliza considered the question. "I don't know. I can't stay in Clearwater. Too many people will always see me as Samuel Reed's daughter. You could go east, start fresh where no one knows your name." She smiled faintly. "With what money?" "My father's moral awakening came a bit too late for inheritance planning." They reached Isaiah's wagon, loaded with the supplies he'd finally been able to purchase now that merchants were willing to serve him again, though many did so reluctantly and at inflated prices. "I spoke with Miller at the bank," Isaiah said, helping her into the wagon. "There's a teaching position open in a settlement near Laramie, small place called Equality, founded by freedmen and progressive whites after the war." Eliza looked surprised. "You're trying to get rid of me?" "I'm offering you choices," Isaiah corrected. "My debt to your father is paid. What happens next is your decision." As they drove toward the Crescent Moon Ranch, Eliza remained thoughtful. "Why did you really help me, Isaiah? Was it truly just for a 15-year-old debt?" Isaiah guided the horses around a rutted section of road before answering. "When I was enslaved, my humanity was denied every day. After emancipation, I promised myself I would never stand by while anyone else's humanity was stripped away, regardless of who they were or who their family might be. Even when it cost you nearly everything. Especially then," Isaiah said firmly. "Freedom means little if you're too afraid to live by your principles." When they reached the ranch, they found Thomas Miller waiting, his expression troubled. "What's wrong?" Isaiah asked as he climbed down from the wagon. "Town council met this morning," Thomas reported. "They're voting on new ordinances, aimed at you, though they're careful not to say so directly. Restrictions on water rights for ranches of certain sizes, limitations on cattle drives through town, new taxes on unincorporated businesses outside town limits." Isaiah absorbed this news silently. "They can't accept that you won," Eliza observed, anger edging her voice. "You stood against their hypocrisy and prevailed, so now they'll try to break you through 1,000 small cuts." "They're afraid," Isaiah said simply, "not just of me, but of what I represent. A black man who refused to know his place, who challenged their authority and revealed the rot in their system of justice." "What will you do?" Thomas asked. Isaiah looked out across his land, the cattle grazing in the distance, the creek running clear after recent rains, the house he'd built with his own hands. For 12 years, the crescent moon had been his life's work, his claim to the dignity denied to him for so long. "I'll fight," he said finally. "Not with guns or threats, but with the law they claim to respect. Miller's contacts in the territorial government, Marshal Hawkins' investigation. We've opened a door that can't easily be closed." "They'll make your life hell," Thomas warned. "They've been doing that since I arrived," Isaiah replied with a wry smile. "The difference is, now they've shown their true faces to the territory. Respectable citizens don't form lynch mobs or abuse judicial authority for personal vendettas." Eliza had been watching Isaiah closely. "You knew this would happen from the beginning. When you stepped up to that gallows, you knew you might lose everything." "Freedom always carries a cost," Isaiah said simply. "My ancestors paid a much higher price than I ever will." As the sun began to set over the crescent moon, casting long shadows across the land, Isaiah Washington stood tall, a black rancher who had saved an outlaw's daughter from the gallows and forced an entire town to confront its hypocrisy. The road ahead would not be easy. Some in Clearwater would never forgive him for challenging the natural order they had long taken for granted. Others would come to respect his principled stand, perhaps even learn from it. The true measure of his victory lay not in who approved of his actions, but in his refusal to abandon his humanity even when faced with losing everything else. As for Eliza Reed, she remained at the Crescent Moon for another month, helping Isaiah weather the initial storm of Clearwater's retaliation. When she finally departed for the teaching position in Equality, she left behind a letter which Isaiah kept folded in his Bible. Some debts can never be repaid, only passed forward. What you did for me, a stranger, a criminal's daughter, showed me that justice isn't found in courtrooms or law books, but in the courage of those who stand firm when it would be easier to look away. I will carry that lesson to every child I teach, so that perhaps the world my students inherit will be more just than the one we've known. Eliza. 3 years later, when Isaiah Washington finally sold the Crescent Moon Ranch and moved west to Oregon Territory, he left behind a changed Clearwater. Judge Harmon had been removed from the bench. New leadership, chastened by territorial scrutiny, had begun the slow work of building a more equitable community. The story of the black rancher who defied an entire town to save an outlaw's daughter had spread throughout the territories, becoming the kind of frontier legend that shaped how people understood justice and courage. Some called Isaiah a fool for sacrificing so much for principle. Others called him a hero. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between, in the quiet dignity of a man who understood that true freedom required more than just broken chains. It demanded the courage to stand firm when the cost of doing right was nearly everything you had. And that was a price Isaiah Washington had always been willing to pay. If this story moved you, take action right now. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell to support the Black Rancher channel. These powerful stories of forgotten black heroes deserve to be told and preserved. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me what you thought about Isaiah's incredible sacrifice and moral courage. Thank you for staying with me through this journey into the untold history of the American frontier. Together, we're reclaiming the stories that were deliberately erased and giving voice to the heroes who shaped our nation's true history. Until next time, this is The Black Rancher, committed to uncovering the truth, one powerful story at a time.